Hey guys, welcome back again, if you're back again, to another little dissection of a story tale. Fairy tale. I don't know what other tales we'll talk about. Maybe we'll just talk about books. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. There's some just books that I've read that I want to read. So maybe we'll talk about those in the future. Maybe we won't just stick to childhood fairy tale. But for now, let's go on to another fairy tale. Today, we're talking about The Little Mermaid. Another classic. Another wonderful one. Another Hans Christian Andersen. He's a good writer. Wow, he's got a lot. How many of you guys have heard this story? Come on. Okay. Immediately what comes to mind is the movie. But how many of you have heard the story? It's a long one. I was really surprised. I thought it was going to be a little bit more like Princess and the Pea, even like Cinderella. Cinderella wasn't a short one. It was like 8 pages long. And there's no pictures in these stories, mind you. But I was not expecting how long this one was. It was good 15 pages long. And it's small print. So let's dive in. It was likewise written in 1873 because he wrote all these stories as a collection. Like Cinderella, he wrote them all to be part of a bigger book. Which was smart because each one of them couldn't really hold on their own. He may not have profited as much if he had tried selling each one individually. So he wrote them all to be purchased all together rather than separately. And the beginning, it's great. It's a setup of what the undersea kingdom looks like. But one thing that really caught my attention was he describes the color as cornflower blue. And I was like, what is a cornflower? I didn't know what a cornflower was. Do you know what a cornflower is? So I had to go on a search. I had to find out what a cornflower was. So I'm putting a picture right here. This is a cornflower. How blue is that? And it was interesting too, when I was looking up the cornflower, a lot of the images that I saw showed it being used in baking. So I don't know if people use the cornflower as flour or if they use it just because of how striking the blue is in contrast to whatever it is they're making, and it's just so gorgeous. But I thought that was really interesting. And I also don't know if it's just really prevalent over there in Europe that you just see cornflowers everywhere. But anyway, so he's setting it up. And the way that he describes it is it's essentially land, but under the sea. So there's trees, but they're kind of like coral. And the fish are described more like birds. So I thought that was really cool. But also the castle was so tall, you would have to stack churches in order for it to equal the height. So it's massive. It is massive. Really, really plays with the imagination and imagery. Andersen knew what he was doing over there. The Sea King is a widower. It seems like in a lot of these fairy tales, the dad is a widower. This just a staple of fairy tales? Or is this just really common back then? And is it really common because mothers died in childbirth? Or because the healthcare of the time was just something I noted. Anyways, he's a widower. But he has his mother living with him to help take care of the household. Now, there's 6 sisters, and so we kind of already know this, the daughters. But the littlest sister is the one that's important. She's the Little Mermaid. Now, each of the sisters had a garden, and it goes on and it describes each of their gardens. But the main garden that's going to be important is going to be the Littlest Mermaid's garden. And it's described that the Littlest Mermaid is obsessed with the sun. And so in her garden, she had built the image of the sun in the middle, and then while the other sisters would get things from shipwrecks, what she had found was just one image of a little boy made out of ivory. Ivory, yeah, I think that's what it said. And she placed it in the middle, and then she has one of those coral reef trees, but it's like a weeping willow, is how it's described, and it hangs over the little boy. So her garden is simple, but very reminiscent of what she dreams land to look like. It's important to the storyline. She loves to hear about humans and animals from her grandmother. This is all she knows because she hasn't seen land. The grandmother, though, loves to tell stories about land. And the Littlest Mermaid just absorbs it all. Seems to draw the most attention for the Littlest Mermaid is that the birds above the water actually make a noise, whereas the fish under the sea, they're like birds, but they don't make a noise. And that fascinates her. Another thing is that the flowers on land have a smell, but the flowers or the corals and stuff like that underneath the sea, they don't have a smell. And that fascinates the Littlest Mermaid. And this called to my mind our olfactory senses. And this is the system that dictates our sense of smell. And it has to do with our noses, our mouths, our tongues, our throats. It's that whole system right here. And if you've ever gotten really, really sick, you lose your sense of smell, and then you can't taste, and it jacks it all up. And for some reason it really, I don't know, it correlated for me that if they can't smell the flowers down below, can they really even taste the food that they're eating down below? Of the mermaids turn 15, they're allowed to go up to the surface, and in the moonlight, they're allowed to observe the land, the ships, and it's sort of like a coming of age thing. Every culture has them, and it's like driving a car, getting your license. So that was kind of cool. They related it in that way. It probably connected with the younger audiences, and it probably connected with the older audiences that he was writing this story for. And so there's 6 sisters, remember? And so as each one reaches that, they get to go up, they come down, and then they tell all the sisters about it. But then a year has to go by, and then the next one gets to go up. And so it's like a ticking off of each one. And the littlest one has to wait all this time for 5 sisters to do this. And it's just like, it's killing her inside. Have you ever had that, you just can't wait for your turn? Well, that's what she's doing. And it never seemed to be enough just to hear the stories, because first of all, she's been hearing the stories from her grandmother. But stories from your elders can seem outdated. But then you're hearing it from your older siblings, and those just seem so cool. But then you want it to be your turn. But she's being patient. And I think that's awesome too. I think there's a lesson in there about patience. She's being patient. And I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but I think we can take away from this story a virtue of patience, that the Littlest Mermaid was patient. Not the story we know, do we? In that one, she wasn't very patient. But in the original one, she was patient. She waited her time. And finally, she turned 15. And it's her turn. She goes up to the surface, and there's one ship with one sail open. And so she's watching it. And she's watching the sailors. And she's observing. She's seeing everything she's ever heard. But then in a window, she, of course, sees a boy. Because what's a fairy tale without a love interest in it? And he appears to be 16, and it appears to be his birthday. But the way that he's described by her is he's just got the most beautiful eyes, and he seems just genuinely kind, because the way he's interacting with the sailors, he's not being rude, he's being very genuine with them, he's not being dismissive, and she also recognizes that he's the prince. And it would make sense that she could recognize this. She is a princess, and so there's going to be customs that are going to be similar. And so she recognizes that he's a prince, but that he's also being kind, genuine, all these attributes that I just mentioned. So then these huge explosions go off. And now this startles her. Because think about it. She's from a different world where these explosions do not exist. And she may never have even heard of them, because granted, she's heard lots of stories, but it is entirely possible that none of her sisters, and slim chance, but possible that her grandmother has never even seen these things. They're fireworks. Which is exciting. Imagine seeing fireworks for the first time. We probably were all little babies, children, when fireworks were first exposed to us, and so we don't really have a recollection of that. Imagine being 15 and seeing fireworks for the first time. Could have been scary to us, exhilarating, exciting. You would be awestruck, frightened. Think of all the different emotions that you could have felt. But it also seems like the Littlest Mermaid is very observant and wise, and so I think she's able to see them, have her initial emotion, but also recognize how everyone else is reacting. And so then she just takes it in and is able to enjoy them. So that's going off. She's still watching the boy, but then in the distance, something she is able to recognize, albeit normally she sees it from a different perspective. She sees dark clouds, very dark clouds, and she recognizes a storm is coming. Now, when she recognizes this, she's amused. Because again, remember, she comes from a different world. Under the sea, when a storm arrives, it does nothing to her. So when you're under the sea and a storm arrives, it's really just the top layer that gets disturbed. And she's from way, 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 way down. So a storm to her is nothing, and so she can afford to be amused. But then she starts seeing how everyone else is getting very frazzled by this, and they're trying to prepare for the storm that is about to barrage the ship. But more than that, when it does come, the ship starts getting torn apart by this storm, and people start going overboard, and the ship is torn apart, and then she sees her boy fall into the water. While this is alarming, at first she thinks it'll be fine. She's fine in the water. Why wouldn't he be fine in it? This is what I would call being naive. Now there's naive and then there's ignorance. And I'm gonna put the two definitions there because they get intermingled a lot. I would say this is where she's being naive. So when she then realizes, oh, damn, he's not doing okay. Like, he's going under. She dies for him and manages to get to him and pulls him out. And then this was also clever thinking because, again, to her, the ocean is a safe place. But she recognizes that to him, it's not. So she takes him to land. I think a key topic here is perspective. Again, perspective. Her perspective on the world is vastly different than the perspective of those around her. But she's also really smart, even at 15. She is absorbing the realities of others and altering her perspective to move forward. She's educating herself, and it's saving someone's life. So she puts him on shore, and she gives him little kisses on his forehead. She's really worried about him. She wants him to open his eyes, the eyes that she said were so beautiful. And then she hears rustling. So she swims further and further from shore. And this is where we get her sitting on rocks. She covers herself with foam to hide herself. If you've ever seen the ocean when there's foamy, yeah, I personally think the foam stuff is a little icky, but she hides herself in the foam. And she sees these girls come out, and they worry over him, and then they alert people, and they take him away. Every day after that, she comes back to the same spot on shore to try and see him, but he never shows up again. And she's sad. She finally reveals what happened to one of her sisters, which is not like how we know it. And I like that it's different in the story. She's able to confide in her sisters. Being a sister myself, there was a lot of confidence in sisterhood. You should be able to talk to your siblings. There should be trust. And that should be someone that you can run to and tell your truths to. So she tells her sister, and the sister recalls seeing this boy, and she brings her to his actual castle. So then, from then on, she goes to the castle, and there she's actually able to see him. She's just falling more and more in love with this boy from afar. And then she confides in her grandma. And the grandma is very sweet. And she tries to convince her to let it be, different worlds. And she reveals to her that mermaids live for 300 years. And when a mermaid dies, their soul dies. And they go to become the foam of the sea, the foam that is on the waves. And that when a human dies, and they don't live as long, first of all, that they do have a soul, and that soul goes up to the stars and lives for an eternity. Well, Little Mermaid cannot reconcile this. She says she would give up her 300 years to live a shorter life and to be loved by this boy. The grandma thinks it's foolish. Why would you give up a long life to do this? And she tries to convince her to think of other things, to be happy in the life that she's given. It's good advice, and there's something to be said about that. Be happy for what you are given. And so they throw a huge ball to try and distract her. And I like in this story that it's not so much anger and so much control and restriction on the Little Mermaid. It's a lot more understanding and trying to work through the Littlest Mermaid's grief and angst. Tell me what you think, but I like that difference. But Littlest Mermaid cannot stop thinking about him, and she makes a decision. She knows someone who can do something about all this, and she leaves the ball. And she heads towards what's called the Raging Maelstorms. Wasn't quite sure what those were. Find out it's just like a really descriptive form of like a whirlpool. So he was just trying to be very definite about where she was going. Kind of like an entryway into a place. And what is through this place is a witch. We all know where this is going, don't we? And so she goes to this witch, and through this maelstorms, all there is what is called polyps. And now these polyps, they are half animal, half plant. And they like to sort of attack, bite. And so the Littlest Mermaid is trying to avoid these things to get there. When she got there, the witch already knew what she wanted. And the witch is like, "You're stupid." Straight up. The first thing she says is, "You're dumb, but I'm gonna give you what you want." So a little foreshadowing. You're dumb, but I'm gonna give you what you want. I mean, I don't know what the game with that is. A little reverse psychology. Is it a little just sort of being a jerk? Like she's just a capital B. And so it's just in her nature to say mean things all the time. I don't know. But that's what she says. She says, "You're stupid, but I'm going to give you what you want."
You're stupid, but I'm going to give you what you want.
So, of course, the Littlest Mermaid says, "But if I give you my voice, what do I have?" We know where this is going too. And in the story, it has stayed the same. She says, "You have your body. You have body language. You have your eyes. You can speak with all of that. You don't need a silly voice. He will know everything with those things." I don't know. I mean, there's rules for everything, right? We have choices to make. And there's consequences for the choices we make. I mean, would it have been fair to just give her what she wants without cost, without rules? I don't know. So I don't necessarily think it was unfair. I mean, she didn't not give her follow-up advice. Your eyes speak a lot. In fact, our eyes are extremely expressive. Half the time, humans speak through our eyes. We deduct a lot of meaning from our eyes. We can look angry, we can look sad, we can look happy, all just by the flick of our eyebrows, the squint. And I mean, let's get started on body language. Put your fists on your hips, and you can look determined or you can look angry. Pop out a hip, and you can look flirty, play with your hair, gets across the same message. So it's not that the witch didn't set her up for success. It's just this deal may have been raw from the get-go. Okay, that was got a little off on the tangent there. It's just everyone likes to give the sea witch a bad rap for the deal when the deal may have been bad to begin with. Okay. The Littlest Mermaid makes her decision. Yes. Yes. Because she cannot do it anymore. Her longing, her desire, it's just too much. And now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if this was a story meant to be a cautionary tale about the early stages of love and just like be careful not to be completely controlled by those emotions. Because man, you're just willing to do anything for that love. So Littlest Mermaid, yes, I want it. So the sea witch brews up her little thing, gives it to the Littlest Mermaid, and she leaves. And she's got to get back through those little polyps, and she passes her father's castle, and her heart is pounding and breaking as she's passing it. And then she gets to land. She drinks the potion, and it makes her pass out from the pain. But she wakes up, and there he is. He sees her. And she couldn't be happier. She's got no voice, so she can't say who she is. And he takes her to his castle. Oh, by the way, those girls from earlier that had found the prince, they were his slaves. I can't even begin with that, so I don't know why that had to be thrown in. Yeah. Anyways. So, the prince adores her because she's gorgeous. But also, one of the little things that the sea witch made sure of was that she would be very graceful on her feet. It's not like what we know. She's actually very graceful on her feet. And she's also very sweet. And he just adores her. And he calls her his little foundling. And the days go by, and she can feel his affection growing. But so far, it's more like a brother to a sister. And she's like, oh, I need him to love me. And it's not working. She doesn't know why. But he gives her the finest clothes. He does everything with her. I mean, they're inseparable. It's really rather sweet how it's described. The day where he has to leave. And it's because his father and mother are pressuring him to get married to another princess. And he's telling her all this, the Littlest Mermaid, because he adores her and just hides nothing from her. And then he confides that he will not be bringing back this princess because he can't love her. He's in love with the girl who saved him from the shipwreck. And the Littlest Mermaid in her mind is just screaming. She's like, that was me. Don't you know? That was me. You're in love with me. But she can't say it. She's got no voice. So she's trying to scream it with her eyes. And he's not hearing it. He's not seeing it. But he goes. He leaves. And the next thing she knows, there's wedding bells on the ships that are returning. And this is where it's similar to what we already know. Sounds familiar, right? But it's not the Sea Witch who's doing this. It's just a regular story where he goes off. So the princess from the foreign land comes, and the prince takes one look at her, and for some reason believes it's the girl from the night. And he's so happy, and is like, "You're the girl. You're the one." Meanwhile, the Littlest Mermaid's heart is just breaking inside. And festivities go on. The prince is going to marry this girl. Sorry. And so there's festivities that go on for a few days. And then finally there's going to be a wedding. So the night before, the Littlest Mermaid, she dances. She dances until her feet hurt, and she doesn't care because she believes she'll die the next day. And then she sees her sisters float up, and they hand her this dagger. And she's like, "What's this for?" in her mind. The sisters are like, "If you kill the prince, his blood will allow you to be a mermaid again." And so she takes the dagger. My phone. She takes the dagger and she goes to where the prince is sleeping. The foreign princess laying on his chest. And she thinks about it. She holds the dagger up. And she can't do it. She can't bring herself to do it. She drops the dagger. And she throws herself over the ship. And in the process, she becomes the foam of the waves, like we discussed. And that's the end of the Little Mermaid. She exists no more. But then her consciousness awakens. And she hears these other voices around her. And she says, where am I? And these voices, they tell her, you know, mermaids become the foam when they die. Humans have an immortal soul that become the stars. But because you tried so hard to become a human and have a soul, you have been rewarded with a soul. And really, that was what she wanted. But still, this one breaks your heart. The prince marries the other princess, and the Littlest Mermaid floats over them, and she gives each one a little kiss on the forehead, because they're looking for her that next day, desperately. Man, I'm gonna keep sighing. Ignore me. But the Littlest Mermaid never got to live out her human life. She didn't get to live out her mermaid life. But she did get her immortal soul. So, I don't know. Was this one a happy ever after? This one was a twist. Wasn't your typical girl falls for boy, and boy falls for girl, and they get married and live happily ever after. So, this one broke pattern. So maybe they weren't all so cliche, right? Not bad. It's a good thing. We need to embrace this more. Stop making them all so cookie cutter. There's a lot to learn from this. In truth, the Littlest Mermaid was patient. She waited until her 15th birthday to go up to the surface. She followed the rules. She did break them. Well, did she break them? I don't know. I don't know what the rules were about going to see the Sea Witch. So, not gonna say she broke the rules in doing that. She did go to the Sea Witch and get that potion and become a human. I think there's a lesson about young love. It's fickle. Maybe not for both parties. She was definitely in love with the prince. And he claimed to be in love with her because he said he was in love with the girl that saved him, but then thought that the foreign princess who he never met was the one that saved him. Interesting. It's a good story though. It's not your classic cookie cutter fairy tale. If you get a chance, read it for yourself. Like I said, it's like 15 pages long. It's longer than some of the other ones, but it's not like it's a novel. And it's not your standard children's story. I'm sure it was read to children back in the day. You wouldn't read this to like your 4-year-old, but you might recommend it for your 10-year-old to read. Anyways, okay. Now I'm like deep in thought, so I'm not gonna bore you by having you sit here and watch me think. Have a good day, and happy trails, and never stop reading fairy tales. Bye guys!